Well, this week's tragic train derailment in Philadelphia has quickly turned into a political issue, a hot potato as a matter of fact. 8 people died and more than 200 were injured when Amtrak train 188 went off the rails on its way to New York City. Even as rescue workers were still on the scene, debate began over whether congressional cost-cutting might have played a role in the tragedy. In fact, the very next day after the crash, Republicans reduced the budget for Amtrak even further. House Speaker John Boehner, as many of you know, dismissed any connection between the budget cuts and the crash. He pointed out that the train was going twice as fast as it should have, though the reason why is still under investigation. Well, Michael Brooks is a political strategist and media columnist. Michael, welcome to Arise Review. I got to ask you, John Boehner, the name always brings up controversy here. How could he not equate budget cuts to this when Amtrak officials and experts say if they had that positive track control system, it could have avoided this crash?
Because for 2 very basic reasons that unfortunately all have to do with politics and not policy, and certainly not safety. One is he's giving voice to a very extreme Republican Party that sees any type of public investment, particularly a public investment that do not affect most of their constituents, as useless. And secondly, he has to, even if he thinks otherwise, play to that base, not only of voters, but within his own caucus. It's a very extreme caucus.
Okay, the light is on the darkness here and the roaches have scattered. It seems to me now that Republicans can see that this is probably not a good move, that they should install it. We're talking about $800 million here. What happens now? What is the end game here, Michael Brooks? What happens?
Well, the end game is you got to draw these distinctions. You're absolutely right in the large aggregate sense. But remember, most of these guys are representing districts that are not affected by Amtrak and have some very, very extreme anti-government views. So they can play to their base without worrying about national opinions and certainly other geographies.
So you're saying perhaps the support for more funding here might not play as well as in Mississippi as it would on the Northeast Corridor, the most heavily trafficked area for Amtrak trains in the country.
I'm saying definitely geography is significant, but there's also a real ideological component that we can't overlook either.
So you're saying basically, Michael, that when lives are in balance here, we're talking about lives here, so it really goes beyond politics. You know, when we had 9/11 and they saw what happened, the tragedy, we saw people coming from all over the country, you know, to help out. I mean, I covered that story extensively. In a situation like this where you see lives, and of course the media comes and brings a lot of these lives here, they come almost personal to you. It seems to me that would cut through some of the politics.
Well, apparently it hasn't. And in fact, not only has it not, Republicans have actually tried a sort of cynical political jujitsu to say that using this tragedy, that's in fact cynical. That's the argument they've tried to make. So apparently it hasn't. And there's no doubt that our national infrastructure is indeed national infrastructure. This isn't just a question of geography. This is about safety, the economy, and even national prestige.
Now, we don't want to see this happen. I want to emphasize that. But if there was a situation, unthinkable, where another train derailed, say in Mississippi or something like that, maybe we might see some movement here by Republicans, the extremists in the party, that might change their ideas or thinking about funding.
Yeah, I think sadly that's true.
You know, Michael, I got to tell you, this is, you know, what can you say about this?
I can't be a bearer of positive news. I mean, I think the other thing to add to this that's also very important is that there's a global dimension of this. You know, China's investing over $100 billion in their rail system in just this year alone. So infrastructure is about security, it's about the economy, it's about our environment. And until we're willing to invest, we're going to keep falling behind and have tragedies like this.
Well, here's the deal. You know, of course, the Obama administration has been talking about, you know, changing the infrastructure here, updating it, so on and so forth. Right. And of course, he's also talked about putting high-speed trains in the United States. We can't even begin to look at that situation right now when we still have problems with a railway here that is somewhat in decay. It's still safe for the most part, but, you know, there are problems with it, and we don't have all the safeguards here. What would it take to change any of the systems here to make the situation safer for people who want to travel on these trains?
Well, it's exactly as you say. I mean, you have bridges that are 100 years old that trains are going over. So in some respects, kind of thinking about bullet trains and upgrading that infrastructure is sort of like thinking about getting into, incredibly great shape while you're still recovering from a significant injury in the hospital. So you're exactly right. You're not building on a strong base.
I got a last question for you. You know, politics is a game of compromise. It's always been that. What might it take, in your opinion, to get the Republicans to change their mind on this if they could get something from the Democrats that they've been sorely lacking and missing? What might that be?
Well, this is the problem with the modern Republican Party. I mean, in 2010, 2011, President Obama offered really unparalleled cuts to programs like Medicare, Social Security, from a Democratic perspective. And those of us on that side were quite opposed to those cuts.
Right.
Republicans still wouldn't allow their leadership to take that deal because they're playing an all or nothing game. And again, when you look at it on a district by district basis, it makes sense. They're not punished for that. Unless they're running for president and dealing with the national landscape, they don't have to worry about that.
Right.
That's very popular in their districts. So while we're in that dynamic, it's very hard to compromise.
Okay, the Republicans and Democrats fiddling while Amtrak burns, I guess, as it were. Michael Brooks, thank you so much for joining us.
It's always my pleasure. Thank you.
All right.